Hello, today is a video on the web interface of the EE4G router, which is otherwise known as model number HH70VB and possibly HH70VB-2BE8GB3. The aim of this video is to make it easier for anyone to support somebody who has one of these routers if you do not have one of these routers in front of you and you need to talk them through going through certain pages and making settings changes. At least with this video, hopefully you can see what they're seeing and talk them through things easier. So the default IP address of this router is 192.168.1.1, and you can get to this summary page without having to log in, which shows the Wi-Fi name and your signal strength. The top right box is a link to an online system at EE for looking up your data and how much you have left, and in the bottom left again the link to my account is also just a link off to EE's website. Right hand side, the login to read texts is a link in the router, and the forward text to your 4G EE Wi-Fi number to a different phone is also a link that takes you within the router. At the top of the page, and I think on every page, you have these status icons which show whether you're connected at 4G, 3G, possibly 2G or GSM, the signal strength, whether it's connected to the internet, and whether Wi-Fi is enabled. So I'm going to click on the main logon icon, which is this yellow link here, and the default password is just admin. It might force you to change it before you can go any further. Okay, so let's go back to the home icon and click back on this login. Log in with the new password, and it dumps you onto the wireless settings page. Because this is going to be about every single settings page, I'm going to go through this kind of linearly, so I'm going to skip backwards to the status screen. Clicking home takes you back to that home screen, and then when you click on the link again, it asks you for the password. So basically clicking home, in fact it says on the little tooltip there, actually logs you out. So I'm going to click on status, and that will show you whether your SIM is working. So if you put in a SIM which is not an EE SIM, it will say SIM locked, unless you've got the unlock code, whether you're connected, which network you're connected to, what technology you're connected using, and the IP address on the WAN side. Most of the time this IP address will be totally pointless because most networks in the UK use carrier grade NAT, other than I think maybe 3 if you use one of their access point names, gives you a public IP address. But yeah, most of the other networks use carrier grade NAT, so knowing this IP address won't help you at all. It won't help you connect to CCTV in your building because this is kind of one step removed from a public IP address. So that's for the status screen internet. Under LAN, it shows you, strangely, an IP address which is not the IP address of the LAN. I presume that means that's the IP address of the computer that is plugged in. Let's find out. And indeed it is. So I'm not sure what that would show there if you have a switch plugged in and you have multiple things hanging off of that one LAN port, but that there, if you have a single device connected, is the IP address of the device which is connected. WAN is the second LAN port, or it's labelled as WAN, LAN1/WAN on the back of the router. That would be the details if it had detected or been configured to connect using that first LAN port. Wi-Fi status shows how many things are connected on the, well, it shows you the wireless name and how many things are connected, and again the same for the 5 GHz Wi-Fi. Statistics and internet shows you how much data you've used as measured by the router, which, as it says on all of these MiFi type devices, that these figures should be a guide, and for some reason the network might not match up. So actually what is billed by the mobile provider may not match. LAN shows how many megabytes and packets have been sent and received on the 2 LAN ports, and similarly for Wi-Fi. Moving on to the Services tab along the top, you can read and send text messages, configure SMS forwarding, so if this device receives a text message it can forward it on to another number. You can't edit the SMS center, but you can turn on or off SMS delivery reports, which sometimes can be very helpful. Under Services and then Share, if you, for some reason it signed me out, if you have a USB drive plugged in, or possibly a portable hard disk or a desktop hard disk over USB to this device, you can share the information on it through Samba, which is Windows File Shares, or FTP. Interesting that a lot of these sections seem to require you to retype in the password. And under Services, Share, Connected Devices, it looks like you can enable and disable access to the shared storage and also access to the internet. So you could have a device that can just access the shares. You could also have a device that can only access the internet, or I guess something connected that can't do anything at all. I'm going to see how quickly this disables access to the internet. So I'm pinging OpenDNS here. Let's turn off internet access and see how quickly it blocks access. It looks like it's pretty instant, which is good. And re-enable it. Yeah, that's acceptable. Sometimes routers can be a little bit finicky and slow about switching that kind of thing off and on. Moving away from the Services tab and going into Settings, it comes up with a quick setup wizard, which I'm not going to go through. Under Setup, Data Connection, you can turn on roaming as to whether this router will make a data connection if it's not on its home network, so if you're abroad. And you can enable or disable IPv6 if the network supported it, which most networks in the UK do not. I think 3 does support it, but only if you're using Apple devices. Profile management will be to do with the APN or access point name, which the router will use. And you can add and save and set as default different ones. Network selection, again, will be to do with, well, probably roaming. There's not really much point in using the network selection if you're in your home country, because you should be on your home data network. If you're abroad, you may wish to use this screen to prefer one of the networks which may perform better, or for roaming prices may be cheaper. Into the Wi-Fi section, which is where we landed earlier when we clicked on the big yellow button on the home page, and you can change the SSID of the 5 GHz and password of the 2.4 and the 5 GHz Wi-Fi. Normally you would want these to be the same, so possibly if I were setting it up I'd be removing that and having them both the same, so that devices can decide whether they connect to the 2.4 or the 5 GHz. It is a good idea, well, if you're doing that you need to definitely make sure the wireless keys are the same. Some people do like having the 2 and the 5 gigahertz. Some people do like having the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz separate because some devices can fixate on the 2.4 and not go up to the faster 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. Whereas if you have them as separate names, it makes it very easy to specifically tell the device which one to connect to. Under Advanced, you've got a lot of information about the channels that it will connect to, AP isolation, which probably means that the devices that are on the Wi-Fi can't talk to each other, and also the spectrum or the bandwidth which it will take up. The higher you select on that, the higher speed you will get between wireless devices. Onto WPS, and you can trigger, without pressing the button on the side of the device, the WPS mode by going into here, clicking on PVC, push button config, and clicking on apply. That puts the router into WPS mode for the next 2 minutes. Under security, then SIM pin management, you can enable or disable the pin or probably automatic SIM unlocking. It won't let me do this at the moment because my SIM is in and I'm connected to the internet. Under Advanced Settings, we can configure WAN, which will be to do with the WAN port, the Ethernet port, not the mobile broadband side of it. So I guess the idea, or one of the use cases of this router, would be using it as a standard router, and then when the wired Ethernet fails, possibly it will then go over to the mobile network. MAC address cloning, which is useful on some internet provider networks if they identify your connection or your devices using MAC addresses. LAN is where you can change the IP address of the router and its DHCP range. WAN ping is where you can enable ping on the WAN port. Going back to the carrier grade NAT, which most UK providers use, turning on WAN ping will not achieve a lot because you'll be behind NAT, so the IP address that your router has isn't accessible to ping anyway. And interestingly, I lost internet when I changed that, and when I turned it on again, I got internet access back. Let's try that again. WAN port ping. So I'm not sure if they've made a mistake there. It could be the firmware version that I'm running, but it looks like when I turn on WAN port ping, it seems to block LAN to WAN ping. So maybe it enables some kind of firewall rule, which isn't quite right. Let's just check whether I've got internet access. Yeah, I do still have internet. So this there's obviously a bug in the firmware where enabling WAN ping breaks LAN to WAN ping, which isn't very useful. So I'll leave that turned off for the moment. And as I say, turning on WAN ping doesn't do anything useful because the IP address that this router has on the mobile network is not a public IP address. IP address filtering, not really a great way to block stuff on your network because it's going to be very easy to get around, and the same with the MAC filter. So if there's something on your network that's using a lot of bandwidth or you want to disable, you're better off physically unplugging it or changing your Wi-Fi password so they can't connect than you are using the IP address filter or the MAC filter, because those are both very easily bypassed. DMZ, which is demilitarized zone, or basically port forward all of the ports through to this computer or a computer, is again not particularly useful on most UK mobile networks because of the carrier grade NAT. So you can't actually connect in anyway, so ignore that. ALGs, or application layer gateways, looks like there's only one of those. I'm not sure what H323 is, but quite often on this ALGs you'll see stuff for VPNs or SIP or VoIP. It looks like this only has one for something which is probably quite obscure. UPnP, again, carrier grade NAT will mean that UPnP is pretty useless anyway. Universal plug and play is a way for devices to automatically add port forwards on the router, but adding a port forward on the router when you're on most UK networks will not do anything anyway. NTP servers, so that this router knows the time. You shouldn't ever really need to change these. I guess maybe if the OpenWRT pool gets removed, then you might want to set it to Europe or another region, but there really should be no reason that you'd need to change any of those. Virtual servers, which will be port forwarding. Again, not much point port forwarding because of carrier grade NAT, but if you're lucky enough to be on a connection or a SIM or a plan which gives you a public IP address, then this is how you'd port forward. So I'm going to call this squared proxy. I'm going to start up on my laptop. I think it was 227 for my IP address, if I remember correctly. It was 8080 8080 protocol TCP status on, and that's added a port forward. So if I had a public IP address on the 4G router, you would then be able to connect into my laptop on port 8080. QoS, which is quality of service, might actually be quite useful on, at least if you know what speed you can get, you can fill in these details, making sure that you fill it in slightly below what you can get, and also it needs to be the lowest speed which you are generally likely to see across, say, a week. The trouble with QoS on mobile networks is the mobile network speed is incredibly variable depending on usage and contention and how many other people are downloading or uploading at the same time. So filling in these speeds of your link gets very difficult because your link speed will change throughout the week and throughout the day depending on those factors. However, you would be able to limit the speed of certain devices on your network. So if you had somebody who was regularly downloading, or example a VoIP phone or something which needed higher priority, you can set that within this section. Moving on to parental controls, which are probably going to be quite useless these days because most stuff is HTTPS. So let's try filling in that. I want to block it on there. Oh, and that's cleared that anyway. That's very annoying. On, and it's going to be forbidden between 1 AM and 2 AM. Interesting, it allows me to add that. Let's change that so it's blocked right now. So between midnight, well, let's do midnight midnight and 24 o'clock. Yeah, okay, and 11:30 PM. Apply, and I fully expect that I'll still be able to get to this website because most stuff these days is HTTPS. The router has no visibility into HTTPS traffic. It's encrypted. It's TLS encrypted or over port 443, and I expect it can't tell that I'm trying to get to that. Interestingly, it's not loading, but I also expect that the entirety of BBC will not work, or maybe I don't have any internet access at all. I do have internet access, so let's just try, say, BBC itself, the main web page. Doesn't work. Okay, so it may have managed to block the entire domain, which is pretty, or more than I was expecting. So if I change this to something irrelevant like facebook.com, hopefully I'll be able to get to BBC. Yes, okay. So it can block HTTPS stuff by hostname. which is quite stunning really for this router, I'd say. And now I expect that I can't get to Facebook. Yeah, I have to say I'm quite impressed with that. That's better than the hyperoptic Nokia router, which I've recently made a video on, which definitely cannot block HTTPS stuff. It gives you a message saying it won't be able to. So yeah, that's impressive. Well done there, EE, or whoever made this router. Moving away from the Settings tab onto Device. It shows details about the IMEI of the SIM and the, if available, the mobile number of the SIM, and also what firmware version you're using. Device management, we're into the login password screen, which we saw earlier, where it forces you to change the password. System settings is where you can set time zone. Backup and restore, so if you needed to move the settings to or clone the settings to a lot of devices, or if you're having a device replaced and you needed to back up the settings and restore it to another one, that would do. You can remotely restart the device and factory reset the device through the web interface, and then onto the firmware updates. So local update would be if you've been sent a file. In fact, it looks like maybe you put it on a USB stick, put it into the router, click on search, and it would look for that firmware update. So I'm now going to go to the online updates and see if there are any updates. So online updates, check for updates. I did forget to note down what the firmware version was, but it does say it's up to date anyway, so there we go. And this is probably a boring, yeah, just looks like a PDF of the manual. And there we go. So hopefully this video has been helpful to you. If it has, it would be really helpful to me if you wouldn't mind subscribing to my YouTube channel. You don't need to have the video notifications switched on, but the subscriber numbers really do help. Thank you very much.